What's up, volleyball fans? I'm Darren Tipton, and welcome to the VB Adrenaline Podcast. Our podcast, we will dive deep into the heart of the game, bringing you the hottest topics, prospects, and a buzz surrounding prep and college volleyball, especially the world of recruiting. In each episode, our crew will spotlight rising stars who are shaking up the national game. Plus, we will serve you the scoop on current events that have coaches and fans talking courtside. Tune in for the episodes that spotlight tomorrow's college stars, new trends in the sport, plus interviews that will keep you informed on the explosion that is volleyball in the USA. You can connect with us on social media, Instagram at vbadrenaline.com_ and Twitter at vbadrenaline. Be part of the conversation. Share your thoughts on your favorite players, prospects, and predictions by using hashtag VBAdrenaline. So grab a seat, volleyball fans, and get ready to dive into the world of spikes, sets, and serves with the VB Adrenaline Podcast. See you there. All right, everybody, welcome back. Another episode of the VB Adrenaline Podcast, and my co-host Mac is back after a week on the road, and literally a week on the road. You've put a couple states in. You put some miles on, Mac.
Yeah, I hit some Big Ten cities, that's for sure. I was looking at it. Driving from Columbus, Ohio to Nebraska, we were in Lincoln on the back end. We drove through Iowa City. We drove through Champaign, Illinois, and we started in Columbus, Ohio. So I was on a little bit of a tour day Big Ten the last week, moving to Nebraska.
So she's all set for her pro season. So she went from BTN action to she's done some prep volleyball action, and now she's ready. She's got those soft hands ready for her PVF season, and we're lucky to hold on to her as well. And she's back for the podcast, and we have a lot to get to, but this is a special one that we have talked about doing for quite a while, and it's important to us, and a big one that we'll focus on. So the main topic for us with this episode, and then we'll get into a lot of tourney talk at the end, but the main topic that we've previewed and we want to get to is with this episode is the school favorites debate, and to share or not to share. We're going to dive right into it because it's going to take us a little bit. And so what we mean by this is not the listing offers, that whole debate, controversy that comes after June 15th. This is the, and we're just going to put this up because one of our athletes that just put up a player profile, and we just did an article on the site, Kaylin Husendove out of Georgia, and she listed some of her early school favorites for us as she went into her recruiting year. But this is something that very few athletes are willing to do, and a lot of them are told not to do this, right? And so this is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about because, Mac, I think we're both in agreement. We think this is one of the biggest misconceptions in recruiting today. And so we're going to dive in. I think we're on the, at least from the club side and the athlete side, we are on the unpopular opinion on this, and we're going to explain why, and we're going to tell you what 99% of college coaches think, at least 100% from everyone I've talked to. But yeah, so let's dive in and we'll give you our impression and we'll break that down. But so today's topic is to post, to talk about or not talk about, but your early favorites and just talking about schools that you're interested in. And so, Mac, your initial takes on this topic.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about how if we put a pros and cons chart up about what are the pros of listing and what are the cons of listing, and it's hard to find a reason not to, other than the fear of hearing someone tell you no, because I guess listing everything out there kind of puts everything big picture and allows other people to see what you're thinking. And it kind of, I mean, inevitably it creates a little bit of competition. And I think athletes see competition and then immediately relate that back to a school not wanting them, because you have to realize in the recruiting world, you are not the only one on these schools' boards. If you think that you are the only one on their board, you are going to be very shocked, and it is going to be a rough recruiting experience. So realize that you're not the only one on their board. So wouldn't it be nice to know who's on their board, who you're interested in, who everyone else is interested in? You know, instead of looking at it as like this whole competition thing, people are afraid to set themselves up to look at it big picture because they're anticipating that no that they could potentially hear.
Right. And so let's just give people an example, maybe what we mean. Last year, just because I grew up, talked about this a lot. I've grown up a Gopher football fan, which I talked about a lot. So the big rivalry there, which takes place later today, is Gophers, Wisconsin football, right? So I always said, if I'm a Gopher volleyball, if I say that, hey, I went to Gopher volleyball camp and I really liked it, the staff over in Madison isn't going to read that on vbadrenaline.com and say, oh, we're done with her. Mark her off our list. No, they're going to do one of two things. They're going to dig in and recruit harder because that's their rival. And if they really want her, they're going to say, okay, why does she want to go to Minnesota? Right. And if we want her, by God, we better not let her go to our rival. Yeah. So what strategy do we need to do? Yeah. Right. Or they may say, okay, that's who she's going after, and do we really want her or not?
Right. I think it also lets them look at, okay, you're looking at Minnesota. You liked Minnesota's camp. Geographically, those are two schools that are very similar, and they're in the same conference. There's a lot of things that, like, there's similarities in there that those coaching staffs can go, okay, she liked Minnesota. Let's see what we have that's similar to Minnesota. Let's pull things that we know that we have if we're Wisconsin. What can we do to kind of create the things that she likes about this school in our school? Because now it gives them another view into your recruiting. It gives them an insight into where your head's at recruiting that will only help them recruit you harder eventually. Or like you said, yeah, if they don't want you, then they're not going to come after you. But they're not going to stop their recruiting because you posted that you're interested in Minnesota and not Wisconsin.
Right. Yeah, or any school, and we're just throwing those out, right? Of course. And so, and the other thing, and we'll go into a lot of points here. The other thing is there's not a lot of secrets in college volleyball, whether y'all think there are or not. There's not. Okay. And the other thing that I find so hilarious is that because it's our job and we talk to a lot of these kids, right? And so are these young athletes, and we'll say to them like, hey, who do you like right now? And they'll be like, well, I really want to keep my list, to myself, which, okay, that's great. And then they'll go to, a certain team that's, playing Penn State in a couple days. And then they'll be like, oh, I had a great time at Dream Team camp. Well, you let it out of the bag where you went to camp, right? Yeah. And so everybody sees that, and they post every camp they go to. They may just not put it on a list. Everybody knows, right? And so they post all those things. So why not put it out there? Which one you maybe had a little bit more time. You're not hurting anybody's feelings. You're actually saving these coaches time. They, I hope they don't get their feelings hurt because you didn't like their camp.
They don't. They're not getting their feelings hurt because you didn't like their camp. It tells them a lot. If you didn't like their camp, maybe that tells them that, okay, well, that's how we do things in our gym. That's not a kid that we want to come after. So it's a mutual no then in that situation. You don't like them, they don't like you. That's a good place to be at. But also, like, you got to think when you go to a camp, you're not the only one there. It's full of prospects that are also going to all kinds of other camps.
Right.
And you know what? Those prospects are all talking to each other. Everybody's talking. So coaches are also talking to each other. So if you're trying to keep it a secret that you went to Pitt camp, it's not a secret. You went to the camp. Even if you don't post about it, everyone knows about it.
Yeah. And telling them the other thing that we have there is people around them telling them not to. Okay. And I get it. And again, we're not telling other people how to do their job. My thing is, again, a lot of the questions I ask is I'm just trying to gain knowledge because I don't know. Right. And I just say, why is it bad for an athlete to do this? And I haven't gotten a great answer.
They say, well, it's not how the volleyball world does it. That's not a good answer. No.
And like last year, it was right after June 15th, right before, and we had a great kid with a great personality, outgoing, started NTDP, and we posted about a setter in the 26 class that was like, hey, I'm like, where are you going to camp at? You know, where are your final 4 camps? Because normally where you go to camp tells who you're kind of looking at that summer before if you don't commit immediately. And so we did a little edit, just kind of like we did for Kaylin, and got a lot of hits, right? And that girl kind of blew up a little bit. And so another prospect that we had a great relationship with literally messaged us and was like, hey, when are you going to give me some pub? Like, jokingly, great. We're like, that's what we're here for. We're like, tell us what camps you're going to. We'll do one in an hour. Right? That's what we do. We did one, threw it out. 15 minutes later, we get a message. Oh, sorry, my recruiting coordinator said you got to take that down. We took it down. Why? That didn't do anything. Those schools were not going to recruit her or not recruit her because that went up, right? And how did that affect them? It didn't affect them. It just gave her a little attention. And she didn't go to the school she ultimately went to. She wasn't able to attend their camp because of a conflict, right? She had to make club practices before nationals. That never happened, right? But they, but why putting that out there? You know, it wasn't like the school that she ultimately went to was going to stop recruiting her because she was going to somebody else's camp.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think the recruiting coordinator is trying to, their goal is to, like, they want to protect the kids. They want to help them get recruited. And we are not sitting here saying, don't listen to your recruiting coordinator if this is what they're telling you to do. We are just giving you simply another perspective to take a step back and look at it, because I know during the recruiting process, you get a lot of information from a lot of different people, and everyone wants to have an opinion on your process. Yeah. So again, this is just another perspective about it, and like taking a couple steps back and looking at it big picture. Why are you afraid, or why are you hesitant to share? And if you don't have a good answer for that, look at what the benefits could be to sharing your schools, the couple of things that we just listed, and realize that, like, this could be really good for you and could help you get recruited even higher than you think you're at right now. Maybe you're lowballing yourself, Marley Smith. Maybe you're right there and you need to start looking up higher and keep going up and up and up. And if you put yourself in that realm, then other schools will start looking at you like, oh, maybe this is a sleeper kid. Maybe this is a kid that's a snag that we're going to be able to train and recruit and get to be the player, the franchise player that we want them to be.
Yeah, like they may have you evaluated like, we do with the PPV, and they may have you at a score, and they may be thinking, maybe they haven't heard it through the grapevine, that, she's got to be going somewhere, much higher, or, hey, I'm sure she's only staying local, right? And then they see that one of your schools of interest is on another coast. And then they're like, oh, maybe we have a shot. Maybe she does want to leave home.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a big thing. The assumptions are such a big thing. So if you can be as upfront and honest as possible, that's the best way to go about it. There's a Straight Talk episode on this up right now. And I talk about how beneficial it is to be real. If you can start your recruiting experience being as real as possible, it is only going to benefit you down the road, because there's no reason to be shady in the recruiting process, because you wouldn't want a coach to do that. You wouldn't want a coach to leave you in the dark. Like we talked to Olivia Ward, who was left in the dark for quite a bit of her recruiting experience. And she realized how crappy that felt to be in those shoes. You don't want to do that to a school, just like you wouldn't want them to do that to you. So understand that by being real and upfront early and listing those camps, you are only setting yourself up for more success.
Right. And so with this, another thing is branding, right? Like that matters with a lot of things. And again, this will never fit. This isn't a glove concept. It doesn't fit 100% of athletes. Some just, hey, rather not talk about it, but some do. And some want clicks, and some want to grow followers, and some need to. So when they get to the next level, that does help with things like NIL, right? Mm-hmm. I had a talk with somebody, not from the University of Texas, but somebody in Texas that said, listen, when somebody comes in with X amount of followers, that helps their NIL.
Yeah.
Okay. So some of you need to think about it. Also, some of you need to think about how you're posting videos or highlights on social media, right? Mm-hmm. And I get, hear parents say, that's not my daughter. That's not my daughter. Okay. Right. But then don't complain when others get things your daughter doesn't get. Right. Because some are doing a much better job. And when we come to them and say things like, hey, where are you looking? Would you mind posting and say, I'm keeping it open, right? That's another phrase that a year ago I thought, oh, smart. No, not smart. Mac, talk about that. The keeping it open, which is here, not posting anything, not saying anything. Why do college coaches, what do they think about the whole I'm keeping it open, I'm keeping it as broad as possible? What do a lot of college coaches think when they hear that?
I think that's kind of like okay, sure. They're just throwing that phrase out there. There's nobody that's actually you can't be looking at every single school in the country. Like your options can't be so broad that you're keeping it open. I was when I was transferring, I kept saying, I'm not in a position to say no right now. So I was talking with anybody who came to me, I was talking to them, but I was not afraid to tell them who else I'm looking at. I can keep my options open and still be upfront and honest about where I'm looking. Those are not mutually exclusive things. I think keeping your options open is a great thing to do, but saying I'm keeping my options open, I'm keeping it broad, there should be no correlation between that and telling people where you're looking.
Right. And I think it leads to our next point. What our defense in this argument is, I think, is this is where prospects need to go to flip the table in recruiting. And this, we can't speak for women's basketball, but with men's basketball and football, the male athletes hold the leverage in recruiting. Absolutely. And in volleyball, the athletes just don't hold the leverage in the recruiting. They're so scared to get passed up, other than maybe the top 2, 3, 4 athletes in a class.
Yep.
They're so worried about losing an offer that they don't have any leverage.
Mm-hmm.
And your leverage is, hey, right? It's like a job offer. Okay. I have other options. I'm okay. That's not good enough for me. I'll wait. I'm going to take my visits. I have other people talking to me, right? I don't need to decide in 6 hours.
No. Yeah. The leverage side of it is something that I think people look at and they're like, oh, well, that seems like shady. That seems gross. That seems like messy to like use something, hold something above another school's head. And like, okay, no. End of the day, you need to do what's best for you. Everyone ultimately is looking out for themselves. The coaches of these college programs are looking out for themselves, their college, their program, their job. So they're trying to get the best recruits possible. You need to look out for yourself as well and make sure that the fit is right for you. Yeah. So you need to use everything you can to make sure you get everything out of what you want. So yeah, we'll go back to our first example, Minnesota, Wisconsin, say those are your two schools. And you want to use the fact that Wisconsin, maybe they haven't recruited you yet, but you're a kid, you live in Wisconsin. Minnesota is recruiting you pretty heavily. Maybe Wisconsin's like, oh, I don't want to miss out on that kid. And you can use that to Wisconsin and be like, yo, Minnesota's looking at me heavily. This is what it looks like from this side of it. Where do we stand? That kind of stuff.
Right. Like, hey, I'm an in-state kid. I play at this club in Madison or whatever. Right. Like, are you sure you don't want me?
Right.
Yeah. And it's really tough. And that's why when we say, and we will start saying it now in a couple months, get ready, prospects. What tough questions are you ready to ask the coaches on your Zoom other than what kind of food does your cafeteria have? Right? Like, that's what we mean. Mm-hmm. And if you ever want to switch, and again, we understand the coach's role of it. They need to sign a class.
Yep.
There's going to be deadlines because of the rules, I guess, right? Like the rules make them have deadlines. They got to get a setter, so they're going to give you a deadline because they got to move on. Great. You got to understand what's right for you, and is committing before you even get to look at anybody else. Is that what's right for you? Or are you willing? Go ahead, Mac.
Are you willing to use everything as leverage? Are you willing to take a look at everything and use it how you want to make it I just feel like everyone's trying to they're too worried about the big picture and everybody else that's involved. You have to use everything that is in front of you to help yourself. You have to be a little bit selfish in this process because you have to look out for yourself and make the best decision for you. And if that means that means putting everything out there so that you can look at all of the other schools and use that as leverage, that's the best way to go about it. Another example that I've been thinking on is like, if I look at all of these, kind of like what I said earlier, say you're looking like mid-range, maybe you've gone to a couple top camps, but not a ton of top camps. Some of those other schools that look at your profile and see that, oh, you've maybe dabbled in a couple top camps. This is a kid that is very specific in what they want. They've been looking at these mid-range schools. They know what they want. Okay, let's take a look at that because maybe we're in their same region. We're right in that zone. So there's other ways that you don't have to straight up say it as leverage, but just posting it on the site or under your name shows the coaches, and that's how it creates the leverage as well.
Yeah. And so what we're talking about, and we're just going to use Kaylin again with hers, and these will change. Again, none of this is set in stone, and we think we're going to advocate for our player profiles, of course, but when you do these, they could change every month, every couple of weeks if you wanted to, right? Kids change. That's okay. Yeah. And also, by the way, that is why college coaches pay more attention to our site, we believe. And we believe that because college coaches have given us that input of, hey, if they're putting things like this on there and then all of a sudden say, I don't know, Memphis drops off in a month. Well, guess what? Yeah. Guess what that coach thinks? Why? Right? And so they're going to reach out to Kaylin's recruiting coordinator and say, hey, can you find out why? Right? Or yeah.
What's the situation? It gives them a clear-cut view of where they're at. It's nothing in the dust. And maybe that makes them realize, Memphis then realizes, okay, she dropped off because these 3 reasons. They talk to the recruiting coordinator, they get those 3 reasons, and they're like, okay, hey, look, this is where we're at. Here, they press even harder so that they can get you that information. And maybe you were just like left in the dark on a couple of things that you didn't even realize were out there. And because you posted and took it off and changed it and swapped it around, that allowed them to push even harder and come after you. And maybe you were on the same page the whole time and didn't even realize it.
Right. And so you look here and then you look at the range, right? And so what we're talking about with Kaylin is if you follow us and you talk about our pyramid, all of these coaches know whether it's our pyramid and our levels, they have an idea of where they compare to these schools, right? All of the programs in the country have an idea where they are compared to a Michigan State or a Kansas State or a Florida, right? And they have an idea where they are regionally, right? Because I look and I'm like, Florida and Michigan State are not in the same region.
No.
Right. And you can look at her player profile and see where she's camped at, right? There's a lot of things you can learn and you're like, okay, why did she camp here? Right. And here's her club team. So now I'm going to get there in early January. I'm going to watch her. Does she meet our athletic requirements? Yes. She's a good enough player. Okay. Now, what is it about? Well, there's an interview up on our site. Okay. What does she say about it? Well, great. She may not fit what we're looking for at all. Right. That's step number 1. And you got to be okay with it. And that's right, because there's over 330 plus schools out there. Not everyone. You don't want to take that many phone calls, first of all, on June 15th, right? Which is my other pet peeve with this whole thing. We want to keep it open, right? And then what's the first thing we hear on June 16th? How was the process? Oh my God, I got so sick of phone calls. Well, why did you keep it open? Right? Why did you want 80 schools on your list and then you only wanted to take 6 phone calls?
Right.
Right? Like if you only wanted 6 phone calls, why did you want 30 teams on your list? Because the other thing you don't understand is those 30 coaches had to spend all this time recruiting you the whole time, right? And guess what they feel like now? Pretty upset, right?
Yeah.
Because they recruited you this whole time now, and you didn't even take a phone call from them when they could have been recruiting
the other kid. Yeah. You led them on, basically.
Right. So they want the same honesty, but this is what it does if they're up there. Now, next week, Kaylin, go change this. And then they're like, why? Or, okay, now it's more refined, updated, and they track. Right. But does that mean Kaylin's going to one of these 7 schools? No.
Maybe.
And
who knows?
And does it mean that one of these 7 schools is going to offer her? No. It's her idea, but there's a general idea of what she's feeling. Right? And it gives people an idea of what she's thinking, schools an idea of what she's thinking. Now, if Florida State is out there and Florida State really, really wants her and says, we're not on her list, dang it, we quit.
No.
No, because you don't stay in coaching very long if that's how you do it.
Yeah. It's not how that works. And I think if I'm Florida State and I look at this and I see that she's got Florida, UCF, maybe even Memphis, UVA, and Clemson, I'm like, okay, those are all like, I would consider like semi-Southern schools. I mean, Florida and UCF especially, like those are in Florida. Like if I'm Florida State, I'm like, oh, this looks really good for us.
Yeah, and our football team's better than all, well, not Clemson, but our football team's better, right? And these volleyball players get to go to all our football games. That's what we tell them in recruiting. But so that's what we're telling you this to wrap up and move on is why wouldn't you give people an idea? Right? It's going to drum up conversation, just like we talked about Kaylin now for 10 minutes. It's conversation on her, right? And we're talking about her and we're making notes like, hey, did you see in a recruiting office, did you see who talked about Marley Smith, right? Because Marley put some camps, and as soon as Matt got hired, I'm like, go watch this kid's film and then go watch the camp she went to and tell me if that all fits. Right. And so to do it, we think, as a player, I guess, why is it hard as a 16-year-old? First of all, I can understand that, but why would it be hard? First of all, just to do it? Is it because it feels like you're kind of bragging, or?
That's where I was going to say too. I think like one more concept to think about too is that you are also putting out there what you're interested in. Yeah. And say you're interested in and you believe that your abilities are top 10 power 4, but then you only end up going to, say, a mid-major somewhere they're not making the tournament, but you're going to go play volleyball for 4 years. And like that can seem like you overshot and you under-delivered, but in reality, you're trying to reach your dreams. You have the dream of playing college volleyball. Everybody sees those top 10 programs and they're flashy and they want to go to one of those, but that might not be the right fit for you as a player. So just because that you put those up there does not mean you are setting yourself in, or that you are undershooting or you are under delivering if you don't reach one of those schools that's on your list. You know, it's quite literally just putting it all out there. It's just getting the information out there. It's being real. It's being upfront. It's not setting you in stone in any way, shape, or form. And it can be scary to create goals and put that out there. But just because you don't check one of those off, or because you don't end up at one of those schools, does not mean that you do not reach what you're trying to achieve. You're still playing college volleyball. You're still achieving that goal. There's no question about that. So I think there's a little bit of fear associated with it, in the sense that like nobody wants to fail, but it's not a failure. So I hesitate to even throw that word in the mix with this, because that's not what it is. Yeah.
Now, I think it's different if you go out and everybody just puts out, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're all logos, and all right, we see what you're doing there. And now there is a situation where I guess as a recruiting coordinator, I would jump in and say, now you understand, you're a setter. Those two don't need a setter. And you realize what you did. Now you're telling everybody that you're only going to a logo school, and have you thought through what that all entails? Right. Now you're telling every coach that you only care about winning a national title. And that's literally a 1% of a 1% of a 1% that get to do that. Right. Now that's where I would jump in as a recruiting coordinator, or even us, and say, hey, have you thought about education? Have you thought about geography? Have you thought about like 1,000 other things? Right? I really enjoy the conversations with an athlete that says, hey, I want to be on that fringe program where I could be the difference maker that takes them from, I told you, I talked to Aiko Jones last night or 2 nights ago at the Louisville match, and I loved what she said about their class where we knew they were close. And DBK told us about, like, we need a special type of person that puts us over the edge.
Yep.
Right. So we were right there, and we weren't getting that offer from the top 4, but we knew we were really, really good. But it took that special type of person, right, to get us. And now they're there, right?
Yep.
And there's those kids too that take that special type of person, and coaches are looking for them too, that they're not looking at 1, 2, 3, 4. They actually don't put them on their wish list. They're putting another type of school there, and coaches are looking for that.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And, you know, I won't say those schools because we'll offend somebody, right? But they're looking for that.
Right.
And that says something about athletes as well, that they want that. And there's a group of coaches out there that's like, that's our fit right now.
Right.
You know, and that's important. That tells a story as well. But if you don't put that out there, nobody knows that about you, right?
Right.
But so we'll have more questions on that. You can reach out. What we're saying is athletes and parents of athletes, let them advocate for themselves. Do not be afraid. And whether it's recruiting coordinators or coaches, I just think it's the times where they're growing their story. That's always been our motto, to tell the athlete's story. But I think it helps. I think it helps. I know this is the unpopular opinion. We've just gone around, and I'll tell you, I've asked at least 20 coaches, and it's 100% for me. I've asked the exact same question, at least 20 Division I coaches. If you saw exactly what I just showed you with Kaylin, if you saw that and you were not on their list, would you just cross them off and not recruit them? And 20 for 20 have said absolutely not. If we want them, we're going after them. So it will never hurt you. They will never not recruit you. You're on that list. It tells them part of your story, and they will do more research on you.
Absolutely.
Right. So that's our topic for that. Now, quick, we'll go through these and get you going. Go through your questions before we dive into the college stuff. Matt got a question from a parent, a great libero question that we'll discuss here. Matt, go ahead and read that off.
Yeah. So one of my episodes on Straight Talk talked a little bit about knowing the depth of a roster, like knowing what kind of players are in and around the class, what players are coming in around you, before you, after you, that kind of stuff. Like just knowing the bigger picture, doing a little more research on that kind of stuff. So I had a parent send me a question about how to look at a roster for a school, thinking big picture, and say this specific example is a 2027 libero. And the question was, if I'm a 2027 libero and a school has a 2026 libero coming in, does that mean I should cross that school off my list and stop looking at them? Is there an opportunity at this school because they've got a 2026, I'm a 2027, I'm really interested in them? And then the parent also added a little caveat with the new libero rule. There's a 2 libero system in the NCAA now. So that adds a whole nother kind of level to it as well. So I think personally, my first initial answer to that is, just because there's a 2026 libero doesn't mean you have to completely back off of that school. I think just because they've recruited someone in the 2026 class doesn't mean you have to exit off, wash it away, pretend like it doesn't exist, and walk away from it. If that is something, if it's a school that you really, really want to go to, but you have to look at who that player is, understand their capabilities, understand maybe who's on the team right now as well. Say they have a libero that will be, this 2026 goes in and she's going to be the only libero on roster, or maybe they only have 2 on roster at the time. They're probably going to bring in another one in 2027 then as well. So there's more bigger picture to it there as well. But look at that 2026 kid and go, is this somebody that A, like I want to be teammates with, and B, is this somebody that I want to compete with? Because, you know, if you just want to go to a school that's, like we were talking earlier, you want to go to school and you only goal, win a national championship. You don't care where you're going to be, what if you're going to be on the bench or if you're going to be starting in the lineup. You just want to be a part of a national championship team, and you're okay being on the bench behind this 2026 kid. Then absolutely leave it on your list and keep going after them and keep seeing what's out there with that school. But if that's maybe not something you want to do and you want the opportunity to play, and this kid is significantly better than you, or she's ranked really high, she's up there, she's going to be one of the top kids in her class, then maybe that's one that you go, okay, this might not be the right fit for me at the time. So there's a lot of aspects that go into it, and you have to look at it big picture and figure out if that's something you want to get yourself into or not.
Yeah. And another thing, as we talked about, and I think you did episode again on Straight Talk Recruiting, but do the research on that program. Mm-hmm. How have they used liberos, right? Mm-hmm. Are they, you talk about, do they bring a DS in to move her in? Are they playing two at a time, right? Do they have a libero and then a DS that they are going to move in eventually, right? Are they playing two? So that way, if they have three on the roster, you're there for a year and then you're getting moved into the lineup.
Right. Are the outside hitters playing 6 rotations? Are the right side hitters playing 6 rotations? Like in a Nebraska sense, it's just an easy one because they have a lot of littles playing in the back row right now. They've got 3 DSs, 1 libero, Lexi, and that are all playing in the back row at one time. So they're DSing both of their outsides most of the time and their right side most of the time. So there's a lot of people going in and out, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And those are some DSs that are some of the best in the country and would probably be playing libero if they were at any other school. So it's one of those things too, that like, just because you're not in the jersey doesn't mean you won't get the recognition too, because Olivia Mock and Lainey Choboy are absolutely getting the recognition that they deserve, and they're playing really good volleyball at a really high level. So it's a big picture thing that you've got to look at. You can't just look at, oh, there's a 2026, exit off my list. As a 2027, you've got to look at it kind of grand scheme, see if it's what you're interested in, and see if the situation that is at that school will work for you.
Yeah. Another thing, look at programs that actually open competition, right? Like we talked about Kentucky, and tough situation, but they had a 3-year all SEC. They made a change this year, right? And Molly Tuzzo replaces somebody because she was a high school All-American. With Choboy, she was DS last year, took over the bro position this year. And you got to ask those questions. Is it truly open for competition? And they literally charted for a year and a half, and she finally took that position. But they play as well. They play a DS in the back row now at every year. Again, not something you can determine committing in a day, right? You got to learn the school. You got to ask questions. You got to talk to coaches. You got to be up front, right? You got to do your homework, right? And you probably can't do that in camp, right? You can't do that at camp immediately. And I love it. It's what we talked with Anaya Warren about a month ago. Hey, I really studied the programs as I matured a little bit, and I really looked the next year after I committed, right? And so it's a complex thing. And again, I don't mean to continue to push straight talk recruiting, but these are all things we break down in depth because Mac does, I do, we get questions from parents on these things, and we break them down in detail because a lot of people aren't doing that in their recruiting process.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's the gist of it.
All right. Now let's get into the college stuff. Tournament time's coming. Big weekend. Mac, Nebraska heads to Penn State. Pretty easy gym to go play in, I guess. But how did I know. I'm terrible.
It's a tough
but
one.
Nebraska, Penn State, tough home environment. Huskers last chance before going undefeated in the Big Ten, which I didn't think was possible this year, but they are on a roll. Does it continue, or do they have a tough time in Happy Valley?
Yeah, I think they they definitely will have a tough time, but I don't know. We'll see. It's really going to be the fact that it's in Rec Hall is a huge plus for Penn State. I hope Penn State can show up. I mean, I'm living in Nebraska now, but I've got to root for my Nittany Lions. So I will be wearing my blue in a bar tonight while I watch that game. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be a tough one. I think Penn State's got a lot on the line. If they can win this match, they end up with a share of the Big Ten title. They end up with a hosting spot. They'll hold their seed potentially and will probably end up hosting. So there's a lot on the line for them. Nebraska doesn't have as much on the line necessarily because if they lose, they still probably win a share of the Big Ten title. And they're still going to probably get that hosting seed whether they win or lose the match. So I think that pressure on Penn State could pressure's either going to make diamonds or that's going to crack them until they can't do it anymore. So we'll see. There's a lot on the line, but I feel like I could sit and talk about Nebraska, Penn State all day.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll say, I'm just worried Penn State, the two big time matches they've had this year have not gone well. Now I know they're on the road, but they just haven't gone well. And I hope it's better. You know, we talked about another reunion. You got the Jaravicious getting her.
Jaravicious and Mendelson, both Nebraska girls. Yeah. Which
again, good or bad. So I think a real big test. I am interested to watch the setter matchup because the Wisconsin match for the first time, our little freshman setter kind of struggled a little bit in the Wisconsin match. So interested. She has had such an amazing Stark has had such an amazing season. And going up against Bergen will be such contrasting demeanors. But yeah, I mean, great matchup. I hope Penn State comes out more loose than tight. Because I think if they try matching up intensities with Nebraska, that won't go well.
Yep. Agreed. We'll see.
Good. All right. Let's keep going on. Pitt, Louisville. And I'm telling you, Pitt can win a bar fight and a volleyball match.
Yep.
Oof.
Pitt's incredible. Like that's a tough team right there. They are really good. They've got really good players in every single position. Player for player, they don't stack up against anybody. They're going to take anybody down, I think. Like player for player. They have the best outside for sure. And Tori Stafford, they have the best right side. I think Olivia Babcock is my personal player of the year in the NCAA. But we'll see.
And I I finally got to talk to Bree Kelly after the match. I forgot that she was like the second or third person we interviewed, the first person we ever interviewed in the transfer portal. And then I was at the match Kentucky last year when she blew out her knee. And so interested to talk to her, much better spirits this time after the match. But she was dominant in the middle. Their block was on. DeVere was crazy, but keeping the ball alive in the back row was something I didn't realize they did so well.
Yep. It's insane. Like there's not much that they don't do well. That's why breaking down their game isn't interesting because it's all positive. Like there's no room really even for any sort of like lapses in their play because it doesn't happen. Like they play so hard and they play such a well-rounded game that like Louisville is such an incredible team. Like Louisville is really talented and I think they could make a good run in the tournament here, but it's just you have to find Pitt on a bad day. You have to find Pitt playing bad, and that doesn't really happen.
No, and like I've said, and I know, right, like I know who's the best, but they they look so focused. And again, they were heartbroken last year as well. And they have trained with that same hurt and that same motivation. And they just like were happy, but not like, oh my God, we just won the ACC tournament. It was like, yeah, we just crush somebody else and get on the plane and go home, right? Like they bigger dreams, they just don't get the media attention. You know, and I don't know, they're it's just a focus that again that we've seen with Nebraska, right? It just seems like this collision course, but I don't see them being the one team that'd be mentally intimidated. By them, you know?
No.
All right. Last number one, there's been some debate on who that can be, and maybe it doesn't even matter. I guess, well, it would, because it'd be where you're hosting, if you're hosting or if you're on the road for that last weekend, I guess. But what do you think if Louisville beats Stanford, that should lock it up for Louisville?
Yeah, I would say so.
But there would be the debate, if Louisville would lose to Stanford, would they still host? And I guess that depends if Penn State loses.
Yeah, there's still so much movement. I was saying before we went live, we were talking, and I was like, this is so much movement still at the end here that I can't tell you for sure who the top 4 seeds are going to be. I can tell you Pitt and Nebraska are going to be 2 of the top 4. But then Louisville, probably, Penn State, potentially, Creighton, possibly. There's just a lot of moving pieces still. And it's a lot of if this, then this, and if that, then that, you know? And if you have to look at it, it's like kind of crazy too to look at RPI and top 25 wins and stuff like that, because then in my book, Pitt is number 1 overall. But then I looked at the graphic on the match during Pitt Louisville, and they showed the top 4 teams with their RPI and their number of top 25 wins. And Pitt has 4 top 25 wins, and their RPI is 2. Nebraska's RPI is 1, and they have 7 top 25 wins. So if you look at that, does the committee then put Nebraska at 1 and Pitt at 2, which in the grand scheme of it all, is that really that different? Maybe not 1 versus 2. You still get to host, but it's still like this dynamic, still changing, nothing set in stone. It really is going to be like selection show is going to be a throw in the face. A lot of good, but a lot of craziness. I think I would not want to be on the committee. That's for sure.
Finally, we're starting to sound like March Madness. I like this, right? Like, boy, I wouldn't want to have that committee's job. That's good. Now, that's a reminder. Join our second annual bracket breakdown live show. It'll be on our YouTube, and that will be at, what time zone are we in? 8 to 9:30 Eastern, 7 to 8:30 Central. And we got some pretty good coaches lined up, and a lot of still 3 or 4 to be determined, depending on what mood they're in come Sunday night. But I think we got a Pitt, we got a Texas lined up for sure. Trying to think who else. We better stop there for sure before we lock somebody in that we don't know.
I've got a couple Creighton players on deck ready to chat. So
yep. And players, I know we're good. I know we have a Texas player as well. We have Pitt players. We're going to be good. Then we're going to have some bracket breakdowns. It's going to be interesting. We did it went well last year. Now we actually have a couple people that can talk volleyball. So join us for that. We'll advertise that more as the week goes on. But one thing we're going to end with, if you have time, tell somebody sure to review, talk about it. If you're a parent, if you're a prospect, talk about that in your house today about the posting your likes or your schools of interest, or just getting a modified list out there. It's not bragging. It's not being arrogant. It's telling your story. And I think it really does help. Colleges don't want to guess. And there's a lot of gamesmanship that goes on, and it just does start to help narrow down and let schools get focused on what you're thinking. And it will help your recruiting, we really truly believe. But great weekend, a couple of days of volleyball coming up before the selection show. Congrats to everybody that has already earned an automatic bid. And with that, we are going to let you go. Oh, I got to give a shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Bushbaum. I got to hang out with DBK's parents again, second time. That was my highlight of the trip. I thought the match would be, and then I was wandering around the bar getting interviews before the pregame, and I got to hang out with coaches' parents for about half an hour before, and we walked over to the match together. And what great people. We're both from the Midwest, right? And just Midwestern small town people. And I can see her mom told me the story of her senior year when she, I don't know if you've ever heard it, but she went from being setter to playing libero. Mm-hmm. But hearing it from her mom and getting the phone, it just gold. And talking volleyball, and from her high school days to her getting start in college, and just the volleyball that they've seen. And from a parent's perspective, it was gold, and they're just good people. So I told them I would see them at the Final Four, and that was my highlight. How cool was that? So we just get to meet some really, really cool people in volleyball. And you know me, I'm not going there to break down X's and O's in matches. I'm going to just meet new people. And so that was the best part for me. And what a treat. So that was cool. But Mac, I thank you for your time. I know you've been plenty busy, and everybody, thanks for tuning in. Give me, if you had to take a guess, give me who you think will be the last number 4 seed.
Penn State, Nittany Lions.
Penn State, I think Louisville rebounds big time. I think they get a little nasty on Saturday. I think they beat Stanford. I think Louisville will be 4. And I think Creighton will be coming to them if they make it all the way through. And you were right, that 2-time champs, the back-to-back champs are heating up. So they're going to be a storyline in the tournament. But yeah, for sure. So for that, we will be back soon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like our podcast and follow us. And if you're out there, parents with questions, join our Straight Talk Recruiting and learn from Mac as she uploads more lessons like we talked about today. So thanks, everybody. Take care.